This is Democracy Watch. I'm joined by my co-host, voting rights attorney and founder of Democracy Docket, which is a news outlet focused on voting and elections, Marc Elias. Marc, we have arguably the biggest news out of the Supreme Court this term. Can you talk about the decision that was just handed down?
We have the biggest news and we have the best news. The Supreme Court of the United States just decided 6-3 to reject flatly the fringe right-wing theory that had been peddled by the John Eastmans of the world, that somehow state legislatures could do whatever they wanted in federal elections and state courts were powerless to do anything about it.
Now, will we see any maps challenged as the result of this theory being struck down? Like, are there any existing maps that rely on the Independent State Legislature Theory to survive?
Yeah, so this is a big deal because there are currently 28 cases in state courts that either involve congressional maps or voting laws involving federal elections that were at risk. 7 of those involve congressional redistricting maps. And all of those cases are now full steam ahead. And I expect that without the cloud of this crazy fringe theory hanging over people's head, you're going to see even more state court litigation brought now.
So were those were all of those cases kind of hinging on the result of this Supreme Court decision?
They weren't hinging on it in one sense. They all plead particular claims under state court, but they were all under sort of a threat, a constant threat that the cases would be dismissed because of this fringe theory. And that threat's now gone, and I expect you will see those cases now move forward one after another, and I expect success in a lot of them.
Okay, so now that it's clear that state legislatures aren't the sole arbiters of election law and election maps, will this make any efforts to overturn election results like we saw in 2020, like legally DOA, dead on arrival, or are the implications in this case so narrow as to only impact state legislatures' ability to draw the maps?
Here's the good news. Even if John Eastman keeps his law license, he's out of business in 2024. This ends once and for all the crazy right-wing theory that state legislatures can do whatever they want, whether it's with respect to choosing electors for president or in setting the time, place, and manner for federal elections. The state courts are there as a check. And that is now beyond doubt for 2024 and beyond.
All right, so independent state legislature theory, which, as you mentioned, was this insane idea cooked up by Republicans, was effectively created out of whole cloth as a predicate for Republicans to give themselves license to rig elections. What's next on the horizon here? Like, what other efforts are they putting forward to justify rigging elections in their favor? Like, what is the next independent state legislature theory?
So I'm glad you asked, because, no one should think the fight for democracy is over or that somehow this spells the end of Republican efforts to rig elections or to undermine the accurate outcome of free and fair elections. I think we have to now focus and redouble our focus on election subversion and election denialism, which can take hold and contaminate a culture of how elections are administered. They can create bad laws. We talked previously about what the Republican legislature in Texas is doing to Harris County. So I think we're going to be still very much focused on election denialism and election subversion.
And just real quick, can you give an update on the news that we got out of Louisiana based on the decision in Milligan, is it?
Yeah, so in Allen v. Milligan, you remember we talked about the U.S. Supreme Court held that Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act is still in full force, still protects minority voters from discriminatory redistricting maps, struck down the Alabama map, and just the other day, the Supreme Court dismissed Louisiana's effort to overturn its own loss in a Section 2 case. What that means in plain English is that just like Alabama, Louisiana is going to get an additional majority black district for 2024.
And who litigates the validity of that district once it's drawn? Because we saw in Ohio, for example, that even when a court rules something unconstitutional, there isn't necessarily somebody to enforce that when they again turn in maps that don't comport with the new parameters that were laid out.
Yeah, so the good news about Section 2 cases in particular under the Voting Rights Act is it's very hard for states to evade them. If the state of Alabama is ordered, as they have been, to create 2 rather than 1 districts where black voters can elect their candidate of choice, they have to create 2 such districts. Same in Louisiana. So there's not really much gamesmanship they can do. And if they fail to draw those maps as they're ordered to, then the court itself will hire a special master to draw the map and effectuate that result. So I think we're going to in for good results in Alabama, Louisiana. I also expect Georgia to be the next that falls in line in these Section 2 cases. It's hard for Republicans to get around those cases.
Yeah, and can you just speak about what we're waiting for in Georgia right now specifically?
Yeah, so at the time that the case was filed in Alabama that led to Allen v. Milligan, there were actually a series of cases filed saying that the Voting Rights Act was being violated by Republican states. Louisiana was also sued, as we mentioned. Georgia, Texas are just a few examples. There are a bunch of others. And as Alabama's ruling came down, you are going to see now a domino effect. We've seen it in Louisiana, where I suspect by the end of the summer, going to see the state of Georgia ordered to create an additional Black majority congressional district as well.
Okay, and the last question here, what about Texas?
Texas is the big one. You know, everything's bigger in Texas, including voter suppression and racial gerrymandering. Lawsuits still going on in Texas, and the different plaintiff groups have different objections to the map and different configurations, but it's someplace between a 2 and 5 seat swing would take place if they win. The creation of at least 2 and maybe as many as 5 new majority minority districts.
If we're guaranteed to see another district created in Alabama and Louisiana and most likely Georgia, is there any reason that Texas would be different?
No, it isn't. The fact is, the Texas legislature in some ways is more flagrant than even those other legislatures. You know, it's a bigger state. They did more damage. It's just that those cases happen to be moving faster. But my message to Ken Paxton is, hey, Ken, if you wind up beating the impeachment and you wind up back as Attorney General, you're going to lose in the redistricting case. All
right. Well, seems like a good place to leave off. So thank you, as always, to you and your team for working on, the craziness that was the Independent State Legislature Theory. Rest in peace. For anybody watching, if you want to help Marc and his team, then please sign up for Democracy Docket. It is a free news outlet focused on voting and elections. The link is right here on the screen, and it's also in the post description. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Marc Elias.
This is Democracy Watch.